Welcome to the very first episode of Regenerative Renegades. When we thought about putting this podcast together, we really wanted to make sure that our first guest, Alan Lewis, personified the whole picture of what we're trying to do. From regenerating soil to increasing biodiversity to supporting rural economies and just giving consumers a good choice for nutrient density beef and food. So we have Alan Lewis for our first episode. And he does a great job of telling his story that led to really witnessing firsthand how our agrarian way of life just sort of fell apart in front of us through many different decisions that were made and the denigration that followed. Very fascinating story. I hope you'll sit back and enjoy. Thank you for joining us on Regenerative Renegades. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Regenerative Renegades podcast. We have a true renegade with us today, Alan Lewis, friend, colleague, customer. He wears all the hats. We're going to learn about that. Alan Lewis navigates government affairs and food and agriculture policy for Natural Grocers, a family-run Colorado-based health food chain founded in 1955 with over 170 stores in 21 states. At the federal, state, and local level, Alan engages on food, agriculture, nutrition, rural economic development, technology, biotech, cannabis, trade, and health issues. I'm sure you have to add a few to that. That's a pretty short list. He also oversees organic certification and compliance for Natural Grocers, while advising dozens of food, natural product, and ag tech startups across the country as part of his effort to reinvigorate neighborhood resilience, regional food systems, rural economies, and local supply chains. And you sleep sometime?
I'm just a meddler. What can I tell you, Matt?
It's awesome. What pops into my mind is, okay, Alan, that's a lot. You got your fingers in a lot. How do you end up in this kind of solo position at Natural Grocers? What's the journey, the end, able to do all this stuff using your own personal time, very devoted, very passionate? How do you get here? Take us through the life of Alan Lewis.
Well, let me tell the story backwards and kind of quickly, but I can do what I do because of Natural Grocers. Without Natural Grocers, I can't do it. They give me resources, time, support, backup, and I wear that mantle of integrity that the Isley family has woven over 70 years of running this health food chain. So let's start with honoring the Isleys that make so much possible, and not just for me, but so many other people. So now people ask me about my motivations a lot because I can be so outspoken, let's say, or brash or loudmouth in some people's point of view,
and also thoughtful and driven and intentional. Yeah,
don't forget that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I looked at that and really answered that question for myself, it was all about my grandparents. They were hog farmers in Kansas and Iowa. They had a farm. They had excess hogs. And back in the day, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you could do that. And at the county level, there would be an aggregator take your hogs and find the best market for them at a packing plant. And there were plenty of packing plants of varying sizes. Three things happened since then that ended up with my grandparents living in a one-bedroom basement apartment in East Topeka for the last 20 years of their lives without their pensions or medical care from the companies that they dedicated their lives to. And when you're a kid and you see this, no one's telling you what's happening. You just know that they lost something went wrong. This was the fallback. And when you become an adult and start looking at the history and the dynamics of the system, then you start to realize what was done to rural America. And it really, in my case, gets you focused and makes you angry.
Yeah. Well, that's, it's the story of ag in this country, right? And to have that front row seat I don't think people really understand the devastation of that consolidated power in the ag world. And that's really what it is, right?
Yeah, and let's just look at the three steps here to not to overcomplicate it. First, they lost the ability to sell their hogs to anybody but the big packing plant. That was John Morrell in Ottumwa. John Morrell was there for 100 years
Mm-hmm.
because John Morrell said, we're only buying directly. You got to bring your hogs to us. And then they started playing games with prices and lowering the
Mm-hmm.
since they controlled the market. Well, we know what happens then. Um, my grandparents ended up working at the plant.
Well, and just to say, what happens then is margin is driven down so low that you can't earn a living. That's what happens when there's
You
price
can't
control like
earn
that.
a living and you can't raise hogs because no one will buy them. And the step that I skipped there, but let's add it back in, is that unless you get really big really fast,
Mm-hmm.
unless you borrow money, put in the cement foundation, the floors, the manure, lagoons and cesspits and all of that, and very few people were able to do it. And then, of course, the end of the story is those that did it really got hurt.
Yeah.
So they lost their livelihood. A lot of the farmers went to work for John Morrell. My grandfather ran all the transportation in the
Oh,
Midwest. That means moving trucks with live animals and carcasses around the country. And my grandmother, bless her heart, had a knife in her hand and a steel apron on, and she was cutting the bits off of the hogs at the end of the line.
mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is a woman who would eat breakfast every morning with her bacon. She wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
touch bologna or hot dog if it was the last food on earth because she knows what goes into it, especially at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Step one,
So, could
solid. Yeah.
if I could ask, I don't know which parent of yours, but how did that affect them? Because you're the grandchild. Can I ask?
It it is epigenetic, multi-generational trauma. The
Mm-hmm.
anger of working so hard, having land, having a farm, having a home place, and having that systematically stolen. Um, I feel that. I was born in 1961. This all happened in the 60s and 70s and before. What do I know? And yet,
Well, and
sense of
and I
disappointment and distrust. Yeah.
I'm just hearing you say that, and I can see my nostrils flaring in the video monitor because I have family that experience very similar situations. You know, scaling, not scaling. Either way, it was a dead end. Either way, it led to poverty. Either way, it was a lot of hard work without any reward. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but it's just not right.
These
It's
people should
tragic.
be dependent on government handouts and food pantries. And the shame of that, in hindsight, was palpable. The little underground apartment, the shame was palpable, right?
Mm.
So that's step one. Great consolidation. Let's take all of the wealth out of the heartland. Step two was my grandparents had good jobs at John Morrell. They were able to, in their case, rent a house, but I can speak because I know the history really well. Ottumwa was a thriving community, 43,000 people, July 4th parades, a main street packed full of businesses, technical college, community college. Families stayed there and came there because John Morrell and John Deere and some other related businesses were paying fair wages. Just plain and simple, pay a wage where a family can feed itself, educate itself, have a place to live, and not be dependent on a bunch of taxpayer subsidies. Let's be blunt about it.
Yeah.
So the beginning of step two is that they decided to break the unions, and it doesn't sound like a lot now, but those were $17 an hour jobs in the 70s. Those were good paying jobs.
Mm.
They were good, relatively safe jobs with a very strong union protection. So they did two things, plain and simple. Hormel and IBP, Iowa Beef Products, and John Morrell started trading plants. Cargill was in on this too. They'd sell the Ottumwa plant to Hormel. Hormel would sell its Iowa City plant to Cargill or whatever, and that allowed them to start breaking the union contracts. And the
Mhm.
detailed history of this process, day by day, is available. I'll send you the link in case you want to share it. And again, it's heartbreaking to see hardworking, longtime families just being destroyed.
Mhm.
Once they broke the union, then it got really fun. Step three is bring in the immigrant workers. So
Mhm.
the immigrant workers primarily came from Central America. I got nothing against immigrant workers, let's be clear.
Sure.
That, that's not the problem here. The problem is they were paid half of what Atumwa's traditional longstanding families were paid. And they were not given benefits, and the town was expected to house them, provide them education, medical care, even though at that wage level, that set of workers was not contributing to the tax base.
Sure.
Now you look at Ottumwa with 19,000 residents, barely a business along the entire main street, and crowds of foreign workers at the meat plant. John Deere at Tucktail went to Mexico a few months ago, so there's that too. Where did the 20,000 Ottumwans go?
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier 43,000, right?
40,
Now 19.
19,000. When I was a kid, it was a spectacular place to spend the summers. You can't imagine
Yeah,
the excitement, right? So what happened is that without jobs, they had to tuck tail and run. There was no place else to go. But without a tax base, then you don't have businesses, services, education, uh, sanitation, jails, law enforcement that work for an entire community. So you basically take away all of the things that make a town viable and sustainable, and then you wonder why half the people left.
right.
So now you have a hollowed out town, which happens. This story has happened, all of course, as you know, all across America, with underpaid people with no benefits, and of course now the current regime is going after those immigrants, and we'll see how that works out for the current owner of that meatpacking plant in Ottumwa, which I think is Hormel.
And I can't help but draw the parallel between the apartment your grandparents are living in, and I can just imagine the living conditions of the immigrants who are getting paid half as much. So they're put in the same situation by
Oh
the
yeah,
same by
they're
the
living
same
in shanty towns. They're living in abandoned houses. They're living in tents. Yeah.
yeah.
And there is no money, whatever motivation that Atumwa, I think it's Cherokee County, don't Cheyenne County. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, but there's no money in that county with any amount of motivation to create sustainable housing, sanitation, welfare, healthcare, education. It is being eaten alive by the corporations that decided they wouldn't pay enough for the workers and they wouldn't pay enough for the hogs.
So that first generation after your grandparents, they left. That's what you're
They,
saying, right?
yeah. And I study rural economic vitality as part of my passion here. If kids who grow up in a town refuse to go back, that's a death knell. You don't need to know anything about a city or a town or a village, except do the kids leave and come back or decide they want to stay. Ottumwa is emptied out.
Along with thousands of other small towns
Oh,
in America.
all across
Thousands.
Harlan, Iowa, Yuma, Colorado, yeah, all across Nebraska. Yeah, this is what happened. So, back to my little personal motivation. I got the fire in my belly watching this patent injustice and this capitalist greed. And then you realize it happened to you, and then you realize that it's ever present. the reason that I'd have no choices in my supermarket is the same functionality of these big companies exploiting communities, families, workers, foreign workers, landscapes, and ecology. That's why we've lost our choices. And by the way, Matt, that's why what you're doing is so important, right? You're the renegade that's saying we're not going to live that way. We're going to put our power and our money and our wealth and our animals and our land back into use to everybody's benefit, not just the meat packing plant owned by Cargill that's got the exclusive contract for Kroger, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
and
yeah,
I feel very small in this moment, and very humbled, um, because you know, sometimes kind of flippantly we talk about rural economy resilience, and we're supporting that, and we believe that, and the local small processor, the local rancher, the family rancher, not the consolidated large feeder. Um, but man, we have the same pressures that those workers had and your grandparents had, because there's a large force out there driving everything down, and making it difficult for that processor to compete, make it difficult for that rancher, make it difficult for us as a brand, because we're just a gnat on what. And but yes, I mean that's our goal, that's our mission, that we're changing that landscape, and we're decentralizing the dollars and the control. It's just overwhelming sometimes, the size of the giants that are controlling the market. But we'll see
a
what
big
happens.
part of my practice is giving people hope, which means giving them an idea that things can change, that there are better systems that can survive within the bigger system. And of course, your name comes up all the time. Um, and to all the points you just made, Natural Grocers primarily almost only sells Thousand Hills beef. Your hamburger that we sell is $8 to $9 a pound.
Hmm.
And for years, the alternative at Costco, Kroger, Walmart, Target was $1.99 a pound, 80%
Hmm.
protein chubs, right? And we had to explain that $6 price difference. But it's not hard. We explain to our customers through the videos that we've done with you, the collaborations, appearances, my external speaking and writing, that when you pay $8 a pound for that beef, most of it's staying with the producer. It's
Yeah.
paying for better soil, animal welfare, water, wealth, resilience, education, medical things, all the things that we lost in Atamwa that $8 a pound puts back in place, right?
Yep.
And we have typical American consumers. We are not Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, whatever, that's taking that cream off the top and taking extra money out of people's pockets for the fun of it. We are, primarily working class, some professionals, people who are focused on nutrition, not on gourmet eating. So for
Yeah.
them to pay $8 a pound, there has to be a reason.
Yeah. And just
So
to be clear, just
yeah,
to expand on that, you're correct. Over 60% of our dollars that we pay go to producers. 20% goes to processing. Another 5% for logistics and moving product around. And, we try to operate on a 2 to 3 net, the best we can, because it's just right. I mean,
yeah.
we have to get those dollars back to the producer, and we have to process. And I'm just as proud of the dollars that we send to processors, because of their scale, and because of their scale of being an efficient plant, but not too big, and paying their workers, fair wages. And there is a model there that works, I guess, is what I'm dragging myself out of the hole here, saying there is a model.
part of the model is that my company doesn't gouge people on that $8 a pound.
It's
We don't
so
make
true. That is so true. I
right.
I I know the numbers, and that is really. I want to be a third party saying that yes, your
I mean,
natural grocers stands out on what they did, how they determine their margin. Let me just leave it there.
yeah,
But also, like you said earlier, not feeling compelled that they have to support some other agricultural system, meaning conventional, CAFO, grain-fed ruminants. You
yeah,
know, that's so rare, even amongst the highest brow, quote, natural food stores, because
right.
they feel compelled, like they have to do it. And to be bold enough to say, no, that's not what we're about. We're not going to do it is so refreshing. It's so refreshing.
So we could pay you less or we could charge our customers more. That's the partnership and the relationship we have with you and your producers. These forward contracts at a set price that are profitable, where nobody's digging too deep, that's what drives a successful partnership. And that's we're proving that right now. You know, I was talking about $1.99 ground beef, and you can't find that anymore. Costco yesterday was $5.70 a pound for run of the mill conventional ground beef in a 10-pound cow patty, right? Plop,
Yeah.
wrap it. Um, that's a lot of money. That's 50 some dollars for a conventional plop. Um,
The
it's
gap, the gap has closed some. Yep, the gap has
yeah,
closed some. Yep.
it,
Cost of inputs, cost of cattle is driving that, and yet packers are losing money at that price because they're not fully letting the cost of the cattle go all the way through the supply chain to show up at a retail price.
yeah.
Why? Why would they do that?
The collusion, people lose sight of the fact that retailers are not the victims in this. The collusion between big retail and big meat in this case, we could just focus on cattle and hogs. That's um, you know, a couple of things. If you are a grass-fed rancher, speaking for you guys,
Hmm.
duh, all of your calves are raised on grass. You know why? Grass is free. It's fed by the sun and the lease payments on your land, right?
Hmm.
In the past, you could sell those cattle to any number of places at 300 or 400 pounds or 800 pounds or whatever, and make some money. You weren't going to get rich on 100 calves, but you could run a really successful business on 1,000 or more. And I'm
Right.
just ballparking this stuff.
It's true. Yep.
Right now, between the collusion between the retailers and the meat packers and their subsidiary feedlots, there's one price and one buyer on any given month. So they've just set the price at you don't get to make money. Ranchers don't get to make money. Now, you know this, but let's just paint it out for your listeners. Over the last 10 years, that practice got so severe that ranchers decided stop growing calves. If I can't make money, why should I go through the effort? So now we don't have a large enough herd for demand.
That's right.
Prices on calves have gone up significantly, but
Historically high. Historically high.
the prices are high. Their prices are high because they can set prices high. And
Well, in this case, supply and demand, the producer's back a little in the driver's seat, because supply is supply and there's only one source. It's a rancher. I don't think you can grow it in a petri dish anyway. I don't want to eat that. But
you can
the,
grow it in Brazil and say you didn't.
well, you can grow it in Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, whatever. Yeah, and I don't know, cheap labor, cheap land. I guess you can somehow make that work. I'm not sure about those financials. I just know it hits the shores and it's cheaper than we can produce it, grow it, and produce it in this country. But the producers are in. What's happening though right now in this moment with this diminished, 1949 level cow herd that we have today in the country is, fewer cattle to go across more demand. Um, but what I'm surprised at, because I know the cost structure in the supply chain, is what I'm surprised at that the retails still haven't closed the gap more between grass fed and conventional grain fed. And that's because that price isn't that cost is not finding its way out through the supply chain because they're commodity traders and they take out the highs, they take out the lows. And if I have to lose money for a while to eliminate some of these weirdos with their weird supply chains like grass fed, if I can take out some of those guys and I got less brands or operations nipping at my heels, taking share away from me. So I got to cull the herd a little bit here while the prices are high and keep the prices artificially low at retail, get rid of some weak competition, which isn't really weak. It's just a different model that doesn't include the scale and consolidation that they have. And that's what's really frustrating. I just want a free market. I just want the cost to find their way through all the way to retail. Whatever they are, they are. I don't want subsidies. I don't want, let's just compete. Let's just compete in the free market, please.
Yeah. I want to add two things to that. And this is a question for people to answer themselves. Why doesn't Costco or Kroger or anyone else talk up 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef from the USA? Because if they did, it would make their cow plop hamburger so unappealing. So they've boxed themselves out of actually competing on the grass-fed claim because I'm going to use the word junk because of the junk meat that they're actually selling, right? And there's another dynamic, which is the size and concentration of the feedlots now. And it's my understanding, it's kind of a question for you, but it used to be the feedlots were healthy enough that you could sell a 400-pound, 500-pound calf into there, and they would acclimatize to standing in their own poop and pee and being fed a grain diet quickly enough and healthy enough that they would survive the feedlot environment.
With
And
some
now they're
crutches, antibiotics and other things. But
antibiotics
yeah,
and hormones, yeah. And now
crutches. Yep.
I've been told that now 800 pounds, if an animal's not 800 pounds, fed on grass or pre-fattened on grain by the producer, those animals just can't survive the conditions there.
Yep.
That I don't understand the dynamic in terms of selling a relatively young calf versus relatively old calf, but um, it points to the fact that the whole feedlot system is a failure, right?
Yeah.
Failure on size, on concentration of wealth, on the health of the animals, the antibiotic hormone residues, the antibiotic resistance in the manure that's sprayed right back on our cropland. And I'm digging into that. It's kind of sometimes sounds like an old rote cheap shot, but when you look at what the new regime is talking about through RFK and HHS, they're specifically talking about the problem with the livestock industry, with livestock pharmaceuticals, with antibiotic resistance in the system, and the residual um, poisons in the meat and potentially the milk when you buy it off the shelf. The
Hmm.
question is there really going to be traction there? Will the meat industry actually be forced to address these issues instead of continuing to hand it off to the pharmaceutical companies to give us medicines to fix the diseases that,
And
that we're
if
suffering?
I could just back up on the economics of that
Yeah,
450, 550 calf and the 800-pound calf. Here's what this means to producers. You want a calf in the spring before the grass hits so that mother cow has grass to great milk all growing season. So whatever spring means to your growing area, your ecoregion. And then in the fall, you want to take that calf off the cow so she doesn't have more demands on her as she tries to get through winter. And so her consumption of hay and needs go down after you wean the calf. Well, a pretty common, let's just use 500 pounds, is a pretty common weight of a calf at that time. Now, if that calf, and when you sell a calf, the highest per pound price is the lighter calf. You know, as you go heavier, you get less per pound for that calf. So the ideal time to sell it is, you know, after it's adjusted after weaning. Now, if you got to hold it, now you're holding that calf into winter, where the resources are required. They increase depending on weather, about 20%, given everything else being equal, not growing or anything, is about 20% more resources required to make that animal grow or keep it healthy. And now that cost is getting pushed to the producer, and it's an inefficient cost because you're going into winter, you don't get the returns, and then you get about through winter. Now you got about an 800-pound calf that is now suitable to go into the feedlot, which now you've got the optimum time to throw it in the feedlot and grow it like crazy in all different funky ways. And you've got seasonality working in your favor again. And so that's unfair, really, to the producer, the fact that the model can't handle the 500-pound calf. And really, we
Double the
don't want
cost.
it to. We really don't want it to, but the costs are getting forced down to the producer
It doubles
before.
that next 200 or 300 pounds doubles the cost.
Yeah,
The producer.
yeah,
So
yeah, at
yeah,
least.
somebody made that decision. This it's not happenstance, right? They
Yeah,
they're doing.
yeah.
Um, the let's talk about hope and resilience and returning to some common sense here. It was not that long ago when every county or subregion or large town had at least one packing plant,
Hmm.
multiple packing plants for different species. And the packing plant would buy from their known producers. They would manage the amount of animals coming in when they were in, the storage. They would have their other markets locally and then export markets, exporting the next county over or whatever. And this was a very helpful circular economy where the producers, the butchers, the haulers, the hay growers, the milkers, the packagers, the jerky makers or whatever, we're all working within the same community and benefiting from that activity. So I love telling this story, so bear with me. But Google, your friends at Google have something called the Food Lab, and Google is this insular intellectual place that creates the world in their mind and then um, tells everybody that they need to behave according to the way they want the world to work. And
Nah.
I was exaggerating. So the Food Lab brings 400, 500 people together at their offices in Mountain View, and we're talking about these things. And I was invited to speak about the missing middle, which is the lost packing plants, distribution, and logistics for meat producers. In this case, we're focused on cattle, but pork
Yep.
and poultry are the same.
Yep.
So I'm on stage and I tell my story, which you've heard the most part of it here, and somebody in the audience raises their hand during Q&A and says, "Hey, I work at Cargill. Cargill's front and center in fixing all of these problems, right?"
Mm,
Two
uh,
things.
how do you
One,
answer that?
I did a nice long pause and I said, "No, they went through the country buying up these small plants, closing them and destroying them so they could never be reopened, and they haven't left a crumb of wealth in their path all across the heartland." The second thing that happened is a week later, I got an email from the director of Food Lab saying I was no longer welcome because I was not supporting their focus and efforts. So we know what the problem is, and we know
Yep.
who the culprits are. Will somehow in this new regime will we get some relief? And this is where I'm spending a lot of my time right now, for better or for worse, is talking to the food safety people and the ag people in the new regime about these dynamics, it's all brand new to them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I've been
And
asked to write policy
if I,
statements.
go
I
ahead.
can't use two-syllable words. All has to be one syllable. There's no beneficial insect. There's a good bug. But I'm writing these policy statements for the newbies who know nothing, who are being hired to replace the old guard, right?
Mhm.
So wish me luck on that. But
Good
this
luck.
isn't, as you know better than anyone, this isn't magic. This isn't
No,
some unknown, like, how did this happen? We know exactly how it happened, month by month by month over the last, since World War II.
we
Uh,
know how it happened, and we know the two-word solution: mimic nature.
Mimic nature. And that's not just soil and animals, that's how people organize themselves.
Wasn't that an amazing story from Alan Lewis? And if you think we're just getting on a roll, you're right. There's more conversation with Alan in episode 2 of Regenerative Renegades. Enjoy.